Here is the way to think about this. This is a basic algebra problem. How do you solve an algebra problem with one variable? Isolate the variable. And in order to isolate the variable, you go through all of the things that have happened to it in reverse order of operation. The last thing that happened to it was somebody added 1 to it. So I've subtracted 1 from both sides. Now I'm going to divide both sides by the square root of 2, negative square root of 2 to be exact. And that's going to give me 1 over the square root of 2, which is actually the square root of 2 over 2. At this point, the question is, what angle has a cosine of square root of 2 over 2? So then this has to equal 45, doesn't it? That by itself wouldn't get you all of the answers. How many answers are there to this? Infinite. How many angles are there with a cosine of square root of 2 over 2? There would be this one, right? And there would be this one. And then there would be all of the coterminal angles in both directions. If you straight out remembered all of that and could do this then in your head and wrote out the answer, that would be fine. More often than not, this isn't going to be something you can do in your head. If this number were something other than square root of 2 over 2, or 1/2, or 0, or 1, or -1, or square root of 3 over 2, you would need a calculator. And then you would need to do whatever it is that happens in here. And if we were working in radians and there was a pi in here somewhere, it would become even more complicated, but it still would just be arithmetic. Here is what it looks like when you go through the actual algebraic steps to make this happen. In order to undo the cosine function, we use the arc cosine relation. That's the inverse relation to cosine. So if we take the arc cosine of both sides, on the left side, arc cosine and cosine will both go away, leaving you with 6x minus 3 degrees. And on the right side, arc cosine is defined as plus or minus the inverse cosine of, in this case it's square root of 2 over 2, plus 360 degrees times n, or 2 pi n if you're dealing in radians. So trying to find the inverse cosine of the square root of 2 over 2 means that we are asking the question, what angle has a cosine of square root of 2 over 2? And the answer to that is 45 degrees. That is the answer that your calculator will give. It's the answer to the question of inverse cosine, but it's only one of the many angles that have that as a cosine. And that's why we have to say plus or minus 45 degrees plus 360 degrees n. Now we can start using the arithmetic we know how to do to get the 3 over from the left to the right by adding 3 to both sides and dividing both sides by 6. At this point, we're going to need to break this into two problems because we have a plus or minus 45. So looking at the plus side first, we have 3 degrees plus 45 degrees divided by 6 plus 60n. That's 48 degrees over 6 plus 60n. That's 8 degrees plus 60 degrees times n. Doing it the other way, 3 minus 45 degrees gives you negative 42, which reduces to negative 7. And so negative 7 degrees plus 60 degrees times n is the other set of answers to the problem. So there are infinite answers. 8 degrees plus 60 plus another 60 plus another 60, and negative 7 degrees plus 60 plus another 60 plus another 60. If the problem had been asked in such a way that the answers were restricted to something between 0 degrees and 360 degrees, in order to get all of the answers, you have to start putting integers into n. Now we start with 8 degrees. I don't want to put a negative integer in for n because that will pull me out of my range. But if I put a positive integer in, starting with 1, I wind up with 68 degrees. And if I add 60 degrees again, I get 128, I get 188, I get 248, I get 308, and if I add another 60 to that, well, then I'm out of the range again. So now looking over on the other side, we're starting at negative 7. If you add 60, you get 53. Add another 60, you get 113. Another 60, 173. Another one, 233. Another one, 293. And yet another one, 353. And at this point, you look back and you say, well, look, I have all of these, except that negative 7 doesn't really belong. So these 12 answers are the answer when the range is restricted to anywhere from 0 degrees to 360 degrees.